She bought the cabin nobody wanted, and the land answered by speaking her children's names before she did. Rain braided itself into the field like a rope, and the wagon wheels left slow. Reluctant tracks as Mary Whitfield stepped down, two small bodies tucked to her side like secrets she could not yet name. The house sat at the edge of the tree line, all crooked boards and a porch that bowed toward the earth as if begging time to stop. They had called it cheap. The feed store man had called it salvage. Mary called it a chance, which is another word for everything you will do when you have nothing left to lose. She wanted silence. She wanted a place where a cough becomes merely weather and grief, a thing that thins with distance. But some ground remembers what people forget. On the first night, the wind found its way under the door and brought with it a sound that was not wind, a patient syllable of a name, spoken like a prayer and like a summons. The youngest boy, Eli, stirred and mumbled the word back in sleep, as if answering a long-held roll call. Mary sat awake with the lamp between her knees, watching the flame make ghost shapes on the mantel. She told herself it was nothing, the house settling, her nerves. And when she lifted the latch on the back room only to prove the point, she found a single child's shoe placed beside a stack of folded clothes that smelled of old lavender and river mud. The shoe fit no foot she owned. Outside, the rain made small rivers through the field, tracing out a path Mary had not seen on the road, and the stones there lay in a deliberate, awkward line, two small, one large, like a sentence left unfinished. Someone had set them with care. Someone had left the lamp in the upstairs window lit, even though the house had been empty for years. Mary came to forget a town. The house had come to remember. The first night closed around her like a held breath, and with it a question that would not let her sleep. Who speaks for the dead, and what will she bargain for with living breath? In 1931, when the country was made of hunger and dust, Mary Whitfield left behind the town that had already buried her once. Her husband was gone. The neighbors whispered her name like a curse, and every door she knocked on answered with pity. So she took what little she had left, two boys, a cracked photograph, and a wagon that leaned to one side and rode west until the roads turned to silence. The man at the feed store had called it a good deal. 40 acres and a cabin on the hill. Cheap, quiet, forgotten. Forgotten was all she needed. The journey took 3 days through fields of broken fences and empty farms where even the scarecrows had lost their faces. Thomas A. watched the horizon without blinking, as if afraid the world might end if he looked away. Eli 5 slept against her arm, murmuring words from dreams too heavy for children. When the cabiner finally appeared, a shadow leaning out of the woods, it looked more like something that had survived the end of the world than a place to begin again. She stepped down into the mud, boots sinking, the air thick with pine and rust. The porch sagged, the windows were blind, and yet she swore the house was breathing. The first match she struck refused to light. The second burned blue. Before we go any further, tell me something. Where are you watching from? What country, what city, what hour of the night holds you now? Because wherever you are, listen closely. The story you're about to hear isn't from another world. It's from this one, the one that waits when the lights go out and the wind knows your name. Morning came slow, crawling through the cracks, like something reluctant to be born. The fog hung low over the valley, swallowing the hills until the world seemed smaller, quieter. Mary woke before the boys, listening to the sound of the roof breathing. It wasn't wind, just the wood settling, she told herself. Houses did that. They sighed. They remembered. Still, the sound had rhythm, like footsteps, too careful to be real. She rose, wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders, and crossed the room. The fire from last night had died, leaving only the faintest orange glow under the ash. She stirred it back to life and watched the embers pulse. When she turned, Thomas was sitting upright on the floor, staring at her, his eyes open but distant, as though he hadn't yet decided to wake up. Morning, she said softly. He blinked once, slow. She was singing again. Mary paused, the breath sticking in her throat. Who was... Thomas tilted his head toward the ceiling. The woman upstairs. There was no upstairs, or, at least, there shouldn't have been. Only a small loft. They hadn't opened yet. Sealed by warped boards and cobwebs thick as cloth. She tried to smile. You must have dreamed it. Nobody's up there. He didn't answer, just lay back down, his eyes still fixed on the ceiling. By the time the light grew strong enough to see the field beyond the porch, the fog was thinning. The land behind the cabin looked like an ocean drained of water-rippling waves of grass, cold and colorless. She stepped outside to fetch water from the pump, and as she crossed the yard, the mud pulled at her boots, slow and greedy. The air smelled of pine, of something metallic hiding beneath it. Ela followed her, yawning, dragging a small piece of twine he'd found near the hearth. "Mama, when's Papa coming?" he asked, his voice too clear for such a question. Mary didn't look at him. "He's gone, sweetheart." He thought for a moment, then nodded, as if she'd only said he was late. The pump groaned. The water that came out was cold, clear, and sharp as glass. When she bent to fill the bucket, she noticed footprints leading away from the house, small, barefoot, pressed deep into the mud. She turned to call for Eli, but he was standing right beside her. His feet were clean, dry. "Thomas," she shouted. He appeared at the window, pale as milk. "I didn't go outside," he said before she could accuse him. She did. The rest of the morning passed in uneasy silence. Mary scrubbed the floors, swept the corners, tried to pretend it was just another house, and she was just another widow trying to make sense of her luck. The boys explored. She could hear them whispering to one another, but when she called, they stopped every time. Once, she caught Eli talking to the wall, pressing his hand against it as though feeling for a pulse. By noon, the air had grown warmer. She hung the linens on the line and watched them twist in the wind. From the porch, she could see the edge of the hollow where the mist clung, a low place in the field that seemed to breathe. And there just for a moment she thought she saw a figure standing by the stones, not moving, just watching. The shape was too pale for bark, too still for shadow. When she blinked, it was gone. That night, after the boys had eaten their bread and milk, she lit a lamp in the back room and sat by the window. The valley was quiet again, so quiet that the ticking of the lantern felt intrusive. She found herself counting the beats between each crackle of the flame, as though expecting something to answer. Then came the faintest sound, a soft scrape above her head, followed by a low, rhythmic creak. The cradle. She froze. Slowly, she stood, lamp trembling in her hand. Each step toward the ladder felt heavier than the one before. When she reached the top, the air grew colder, pressing against her skin like breath. The loft was nearly empty, just a few broken boards, the smell of dust and mold, and in the corner, a cradle that rocked once, then stilled. Her lamplight fell over it. The blanket inside was neatly folded, clean despite the years. She leaned closer. Something pale rested at its century child's marble, yellowed with age. She reached for it, and as her fingers brushed the surface, a whisper filled the room, gentle as prayer. "You shouldn't wake them." Mary turned, the lamp swinging wildly, light clawing through the dark. No one. The air was still. The cradle was still. The whisper was gone. She backed down the ladder, heart pounding so loud she thought it might wake the boys. She didn't sleep that night. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters until they sounded like teeth. When dawn came, she told herself it had been nothing, the imagination of a tired woman in a strange place. But as she walked past the hearth, something caught her i' the marble from the loft, now sitting neatly beside her chair, as if someone had left it there while she wasn't looking. The second day brought rain, the valley filled with mist again, thick as wool. She kept the boys inside, teaching them how to mend the old fishing net she'd found in the barn. The sound of rain on the roof should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It was too measured, too deliberate. Every drop seemed to land exactly where it was meant to. Eli began humming then, the same tune Thomas had mentioned, low and steady. "Who taught you that?" she asked. "The lady," he said simply. Mary's hands stopped moving. "What lady?" "The one who hums when we sleep." Her chest tightened. "That's just the wind, Eli." He smiled faintly, not looking up. "The wind doesn't know our names." That night, she nailed the loft door shut. She didn't care if it made her foolish. Some doors deserved to stay closed. The hammer's sound echoed through the valley like a bell. Later, as she sat by the dying fire, she heard Thomas whispering again, this time to Eli, voice urgent. "She said Mama can't stay here. She said she already has to." Mary closed her eyes, forcing herself not to hear it, not to believe it. But the house did not sleep that night. Near midnight thunder rolled across the hills. The lamp on the table flickered and went out. In the dark, Mary felt the air shift, the faint scent of lavender and river mud filling her lungs. Then a soft voice near her ear. "Thank you for keeping them warm." She didn't scream. She couldn't. The next morning, when she woke, the nails from the loft door lay scattered across the floor, every one of them bent straight. The door stood open, and from somewhere inside the house, the lullaby began again, clear, familiar, and full of love. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving behind an air so heavy it seemed to hum. Mary stood at the window, watching mist gather across the hollow, gray and low, pressing itself against the earth. The cabin felt smaller that morning. The walls held their breath. Even the boards under her feet sounded softer, as though listening. Thomas and Eli were still asleep by the hearth, curled together beneath the quilt. Their breathing was uneven. She wanted to believe the restlessness came from the cold, but Eli's lips moved as he slept, whispering things she couldn't hear. Every so often, he smiled too calmly, too knowingly. Mary turned away before the sight could sink deeper into her. Outside, the world looked washed of color. The fields that once shimmered with frost were now a dull sheet of brown. The pump handle groaned when she pulled it. The water came up cloudy, tasting of rust and rain. She spat it out, wiped her mouth, and whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken since the funeral. It didn't feel like anyone was listening. By the time she came back inside, the boys were awake. Thomas sat at the table, tracing something into the dust small circles that connected into a pattern. "What are you drawing?" she asked. "It's a map," he said. "She showed it to me." "Who did?" "The lady from the hill." Mary froze. The wind rattled the shutters, and for a moment she thought she heard that same humming again, steady, like a hand brushing hair from a child's face. She crossed the room and wiped the markings away. "Don't play games like that." Thomas looked up, eyes blank as still water. "She says you don't understand." Mary turned away, unwilling to let the words root. "Eat something," she said. "We've got work to do." The morning stretched on. The fog didn't lift. She sent Thomas to gather firewood from the edge of the forest, but he didn't go far. He stood at the line where the grass turned to mud and called back that someone was standing among the trees, watching. Mary stepped outside, her heart hammering. There was no one, only the faint sound of dripping water, and then a shape, dark coat, a hat low against the rain moving along the path toward the cabin. The man stopped at the fence, nodding once before tipping his hat. "Morning, ma'am." She hesitated. "You're trespassing." "Wouldn't argue with that," he said. His voice was rough but kind, weathered by years. "Name's Jonah Carver. Live east, near the river bend. Saw smoke. Didn't reckon anyone still tried to live here." Mary's hands tightened around the rail. Why wouldn't they? Jonah's eyes lifted to the roof. "Because this land remembers, and some things on it don't forget being taken." She said nothing. The man seemed to study her face, then the boys peering from the window. "Eleanor Brooks lived here once," he continued. "Long before you, her, and her 2 sons. Fine boys. Quiet. Folks said the hill loved them, gave them good crops. Gentle seasons. But love's fickle out here. In the winter of '09, the rains came hard. The ground gave way one night and buried all but her. She dug 4 days, they say, when she couldn't find their faces anymore. She sat out by those stones and started talking to the dirt instead. Mary's mouth was dry. What happened to her?" Jonah looked toward the hollow. "Depends on who you ask. Some say she drowned herself. Some say the hill took her too. But there's those who claim they still see her walking when the fog's thick, looking for the boys. Calling their names," Eli's voice carried from behind her. "She's not calling anymore." "She found you." Jonah's eyes sharpened, the faintest flicker of pity in them. He touched his hat again. "Ma'am, you keep them close. The land around here's soft. It takes whatever isn't held tight." Then he turned and walked back into the mist, disappearing before she could ask anything else. That night, the storm returned. It began with the sound of nails shifting in wood, a slow stretching groan that worked its way down from the roof. Mary sat awake by the hearth, the boys asleep at her feet. The fire hissed with every gust of wind that pushed through the cracks. Above her, the loft door shuddered. She had nailed it shut again that afternoon. She was certain of it. But now the boards moved, not rattling, but flexing, bending inward as though something was pressing from the other side. Then came the humming. Closer this time, not above, not around, inside the house. Mary rose, her knees unsteady, and reached for the poker. "Eleanor," she whispered before realizing she had spoken the name. The house answered with silence. Then the whisper came, "Don't be afraid." Her breath caught. The sound wasn't cruel, it was heartbreak wearing kindness. The door cracked open by itself. Behind it, the darkness shifted like water. She stepped closer, lamp shaking in her hand. The air smelled of lavender and rot. The cradle rocked once, slow. A shape sat beside it, a woman, hair long and wet, hands resting on her knees. Her eyes were closed, but tears moved down her cheeks anyway. "Why us?" Mary asked, voice barely a breath. The woman's lips parted. "Because you came with what I lost." Mary staggered back. The flame flared and died. The room plunged into darkness, but the outline of the figure stayed silver against the black. "They're mine," she whispered. The spirit opened her eyes. They were not angry, just tired. Not anymore. The wind roared through the broken window, scattering the ashes from the hearth. Mary screamed, grabbing for the door, pulling it shut. It slammed with a force that shook the walls. When she turned, both boys were awake. Thomas stared at her, tears streaking his face. Eli smiled faintly. She said, "It's all right now," he murmured. Mary collapsed beside them, clutching them to her chest. "No one has taken you," she said, her voice trembling. Not her, not anyone. But even as she said it, she felt the warmth drain from the room. The air around them thickened, heavy with the smell of wet soil. A faint drip echoed from somewhere beneath the floor, though there was no leak she could see. The rest of the night was a blur of waiting, listening for movement, praying for dawn. When light finally crept over the fields, the world outside looked unchanged. But when she opened the door, she saw it. 3 new stones beside the old ones, pale and glistening with dew. Her heart seized. She ran to them, breath ragged fingers clawing at the mud. There were no names carved, no signs of disturbance, just the stones, smooth and deliberate. Behind her, Eli's small voice broke the silence. She said, "These are for us," he whispered. Mary grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the cabin. "Don't talk like that. She wants us to stay." "No," Mary hissed. "We're leaving today." The road was a swamp, the wagon wheels sinking to the hubs, but she didn't care. She packed what little they had, wrapped the boys in blankets, and hitched the mule. When she looked back at the cabin one last time, she saw movement in the upstairs window, a curtain lifting, a hand pressing lightly against the glass. The rain started again. They made it as far as the tree line before the path vanished. Every direction looked the same: fog, mud, and the faint echo of water running underground. The road that had brought them there had disappeared, swallowed whole. Eli began to cry, quiet and desperate. "Mama," she said, "don't go." Mary bit her lip so hard she tasted blood. "She's lying," she said. "Hold on to me." But when she glanced down, the child was gone. "Eli," her voice tore through the fog. Thomas shouted too, running ahead. But the world had folded in on itself, every tree the same, every sound wrong. Then came the humming again, louder, closer, circling them like wind. Mary stumbled forward, mud splashing her dress. Eli, through the haze, she saw him standing by the stones once more, his hand held in another's, the woman in gray. Mary screamed his name and ran, but the ground shifted beneath her, sucking at her feet. The air itself seemed to hold her back. The woman's face turned toward her, eyes full of something Mary could not name: pity, sorrow, longing. "You'll drown here too," the ghost said softly. Mary's legs gave way. She fell to her knees, breath tearing her chest. "Please," she begged. "Don't take 'em." The spirit tilted her head. "I'm only giving them back what the earth took from me." The fog closed in, blinding her. When it lifted, Eli was standing alone. The woman was gone. Mary ran to him, sobbing, pulling him into her arms. His skin was cold, but he was alive. Behind her, Thomas whispered. "She's still here." Mary turned. At the edge of the mist, Eleanor watched, her form unraveling with the light, dissolving into threads of rain. The valley went silent. For a moment, Mary thought it was over. But when she looked down at Eli, he was smiling again, softly humming the same lullaby. The days after the flood moved like a slow, hard wound. Mary kept thinking that time itself had been altered by the water that, where once the clock had marched in steady steps, now it hesitated, measuring breath and sorrow differently. The valley held its own hours, the hush before the fog, the long pause when the sun failed to find the hollow, the thin bright slice in the afternoon that came like a lie. Mary learned them all because she could do nothing else. She rose, she fed the boys, she hauled water, she patched the roof with nails that bent and then straightened themselves overnight. She spoke aloud to the empty rooms, as if speech alone could press the house into line. "You are not here to take, you are a place to keep what is already living." But speech was a poor defending thing, and the house had memory enough to answer. Thomas and Eli changed in small ways that accumulated into terror. Thomas grew quieter, not in the way of a thoughtful child, but in the way of someone who had learned to listen for footsteps in a room where no one else walked. He would trail his fingers along the mantel and then stare as if trying to read a letter left there years ago, a letter whose ink had run. He began to draw patterns in the dirt, little maps of circles and lines, and when Mary wiped them away, he would look at her with a neutrality that frightened her. "She says it will help us stay," he would tell her, as if repeating a recipe. Eli, younger, fell in a way into the habit of smiling too early. He would laugh at shadows that moved like friends and slip eggshells and stray buttons into his pockets. The two boys began to sleep in the same bed at night and yet wake as though they had been somewhere else entirely. At first, Mary told herself it was grief, that the boys were conjuring comfort out of a world that had been unreliable. But grief did not leave footprints leading to the hollow nor did it place a woman's hair by the hearth when no hair had been there at dusk. Grief did not rock a cradle when no child slept within it, nor did it sing the precise lullaby that slid from Eli's lips. H.E. Dawn, the tiny, careful tune that held all of the valley's small, secret rhythms. She tried to find logical anchors. She scoured the loft for rodents and for evidence of intruders. She propped open the pantry to show anyone watching that they were not hiding food. She took the mule to the feed store and asked Jonah, who had become an awkward presence on the border of her life, a man who always smelled of smoke and old rope, what she might do. Jonah's eyes narrowed like a man studying a coin for a counterfeit face. "Burning sage won't do it," he said simply, which was the same as advice and not advice both. "You could try to pray, but that's for what's living. There's weight here that prayer don't reach." "What do you mean?" Mary asked. Her hands were raw from chopping wood. Her voice had the brittle edge of someone who had not been allowed to fall apart. He shrugged. "Some places keep names," he said. "Some women do love so hard the dirt takes it." Eleanor was given to boys and then had nothing. Sometimes a grief that big hangs on sound names. Songs like a net, it catches what comes close. He spat, and the spit hung on the air like something that would not fall. You can fight it with heat and iron and the kind of sound that scares the small things. But what scares a mother still wanting her children? Mary had no answer for that. The nights multiplied into dark mimicries of one another, each one carrying the hum beneath the boards. The house's small noises synchronized into a song that Mary could start to anticipate a step, a sigh in the loft, a fluttering that might be a mouse or a mourning dove, the hush of breath that did not come from lungs. Sometimes, in the very center of the night, Mary believed she could hear the valley weep, a thin, long sound, like someone rubbing water across a pane until the glass sobbed. Once while the boys slept and the wind traced pleats of mist around the eaves, Mary dreamed her husband had returned. She walked across a field of singing grass to find him leaning against the fence, his hands stained with work that had not belonged to him for months. She reached for him and he smelled of the river and of fish, and then she woke with fingers clutching air and a mouth full of the taste of rust. She rose, heart pounding, crossed to the window, and saw a small shape moving at the lip of the hollow. For an instant she thought it was a man throwing his arms to the sky. Then she realized it was a woman's dress rippling like a flag, and behind it two shadows bent close together as if to listen. The house's logic began to rewrite itself. Doors that had been sealed stood open. Chairs moved. The warm kettle would be cold by the time Mary returned from gathering wood, or the bread she had set to bake would smell of lavender and river mud, the scent that the boys associated with the lullaby. Once, in the pale hour before dawn, Mary found fresh footprints in the field leading to the old stone-steiny prints like a child's, pressed just deep enough that the mud kept them for a while. They started there and stopped at the line of the hollow, as if the earth itself had accepted their weight and refused to give it back. Mary's sleep thinned into vigilant waking. She learned to hear the edges of voices, those that called in the wrong pitch, that elongated the endings of names. She learned to cram her fear into actions, mending shoes, cutting kindling, stitching a quilt. Once, she took the lock of hair Eli had found and buried it deep under a flat stone, thinking to bury the problem with the hair. That night, the stone had been pushed aside and the hair arranged on her pillow like a promise. The boys began to refuse to speak of the woman in the field. They would sit in the doorway and stare at the hollow with the air between them and the world taut and ready. When Mary asked what they saw, Thomas would make patterns in the dirt with a stick and say, "She wants us to help put them back." And Eli would smile and add, "She says the water remembers their names." The line between their imagination and something that lived on the other side of the window blurred and wore thin. Then, on a day when the sky tried to be kind and the sun washed the fields with a color that almost passed for joy, Mary found the diary. It was buried under a floorboard in the back room, a loose plank that gave when she stepped. The diary's leather was soft, with long handling, the pages sallow and smelling of cedar. At first she thought it was a ledger, lists of seeds, of amounts traded, the arithmetic of survival. But folded into the pages were pressed petals, childish drawings in crayon, and names written in looping script. Samuel, John, always the same two names over and over, sometimes with a star next to them, sometimes with a circle. The handwriting changed through the pages, younger loops becoming tighter as the years drew nearer to the disaster. The last entries had been written by a hand that trembled. Mary read through the day while the boys played under the eaves as if nothing had been altered. Eleanor's voice synced in cramped letters breathed from the paper. There were entries that read like ordinary notes. Planted beans on the east ridge. There were entries that read like prayers. If rain comes, let it bury only the seeds and not the little feet. There were entries that became lists of names, and please do not forget Samuel. Do not forget John. Bring them back. The ink would sometimes bloom on the page, as if the words had been written in tears. At the back of the book, an entry read, I dug with my hands until the earth bruised me. The soil is full of voices. It tells me their names and then takes mine. The ribbon marking that last page had been left there like a plea. The thread loosened as if from too much handling. Mary folded the diary and pressed it to her chest like something living. She felt the weight of another woman's hunger for children and understood, in that private, terrible way, how a grief could translate itself into a call, into a lullaby that chased across years and claimed a singing throat in the present. Eleanor had written her love into the land. The land had learned the love's tune. She thought of Jonah's words, then of names kept, and of what to do about them. If the valley kept names, perhaps giving the names back in some proper way might unhook the net. Perhaps the ritual of remembering properly would turn the wound into a memory that no longer clawed at the living. Eleanor's diary gave Mary something like a plan. The women of the valley had earlier written of markers and of small right scandals burned at dusk. Stones set with the names of those lost. It seemed absurd. It also seemed the only thing she could do. That night she built a fire outside by the stones. She wrapped the boys in the blankets. She had stitched and boiled what little tea she had. The light from the blaze made shadows move like slow fish along the grass. She read them Eleanor's entries aloud, slowing into the cadence of the woman who had once spoken hope into a ledger. She read their names until her voice was hoarse and the lad's eyes clouded in the yellow of the fire. Thomas drew shapes in the dirt with his finger, matching the rhythm Mary read, and Eli hummed the lullaby softly under his breath as if it were a prayer and a question in one. When she finished, she pressed the diary into the earth at the base of the largest stone. She murmured words she could not tell whether she had borrowed from the book or made up in the heat of the moment, things like remember and rest. She set the lock of hair on top of the pages as if joining two tokens. Jonah watched from the tree line, his face shaded, arms folded. He stood awkwardly like a man who had come too late to offer anything more than the presence of a witness. The valley listened. The air smelled of wet pine and iron, and beneath it something thinly sweet like old perfume. The lullaby rose like a single note from far off. Mary waited for the net to snap and for the house to return to sleep. For a moment, nothing changed. Then, finally, the breeze shifted, slanting across the hollow and smoothing the grass as if the land had experienced a small ease. For one night afterward, the boys slept like forsaken birds, deep and full. Mary sat by the embers and allowed herself a shiver of hope that might be mistaken for miscalculation. She fell asleep with the scent of cedar and lavender in her nose and a small, foolish feeling that the diary had been an answer. The next morning the diary was gone, not missing as if taken, but gone in the way a candle disappears when the wick is too small, the leather cover unmarked, the pages blanked, words rendered soggy and unreadable as if some hand had wet them beyond repair. The lock of hair lay coiled beneath the stone as before, but the diary Lenore's record was a smear of pulp and ink. Mary's fists stung where she had scraped them into the earth. Jonah did not speak. Maybe that was not for our keeping, he offered finally, voice rough as gravel. Some things won't be read by those who come after. Mary felt then what it meant to bargain with the valley and lose on both sides. She gathered the boys and went inside, carrying the ruin. The house seemed to watch as she crossed the threshold. That night the lullaby returned in layers. Not a single voice but many. A chorus that braided and unbraided. A weather that only the small could hear. Thomas sat on the steps and traced the map in the dirt with his lines, Stone speaking the names aloud like a catechism. Eli hummed and rocked in place like a child who had never been taught anything else. Mary did not sleep. She sat in the dark and thought of how easily grief could become a geography. How a woman's love could rewrite borders and tides. She wondered whether, in trying to anchor memory with ritual, she had instead given it a new place to lodge. She thought of the diary and how fragile ink is in the face of water and time. She thought of the boys Anne tried to determine where they ended, and the hollow began. Dawn came in a thin ribbon of light that did not warm. At the edge of the yard, where the grass met mud, there were new footprints. 2 small prints and one larger, the pattern of someone walking away from the stones and toward the barn. They led into the mist and stopped at the place where the earth sagged. Mary followed them like a sleepwalker. At the hollow she found a child's toy, a small wooden horse, its paint abraded but its face intact. It lay on the ground as if someone had placed it there, then walked away. She picked it up with hands that trembled and put it in her apron. Inside, Thomas and Eli watched from the doorway, faces pale and attentive. Thomas met her eyes for a moment, and in his look was the last dull, stubborn trace of a boy before the grief that had learned to sing. She wanted us to have this, he said quietly. Mary could not tell whether the offering was a gift or a claim. She could only hold the small painted horse and listen as the valley began to hum again, the sound rising from earth and water and memory until it filled the hollow and made the air round her chest ache. The house kept its secrets. So did the valley. Mary understood then, with the clarity of someone who has been given nothing and still must make choices, that there would be no one simple victory. There would be small mercies nights when the boys slept, mornings when the sky offered thin kindness, and there would be losses, cruel and patient. She would have to keep the diary's ruin beneath her skin, like a lesson, and the lullaby beneath her teeth, like a small medicine. That afternoon, Jonah came back with a length of iron chain and a coil of rope. He did not look at the diary's smear, but at the stones, then at Mary. If you want to bind this place, he said, you bind with metal and sweat and the kind of stubbornness that keeps a roof from falling. You do not bargain with it on the terms of a woman who lost her boys. You write a new ledger with your hands. Mary took the rope. The weight of it was honest. She tied one end to the largest stone and the other to the beam of the porch. She looked at Jonah, whose lined face softened in a way that made him look younger and smaller at once. Help me then, she said. He nodded. They would work till the sun dropped like a coin. They would make a circle of their bodies and their tools and their prayers. They would attempt to trade the ache for a halt, to give the valley a new rhythm to remember. The ritual was clumsy and human and full of terror, but it was the only thing she had. As they labored, the boys stood aside and watched the hard work of two adults, the kind of labor that taught names to wood and to mud. Thomas mapped the rope with a stick, and Eli hummed, the lullaby now sounding like some small thing the boys could not put down. That night, with the rope knotted and the beam braced and the chain sunk into the loam, Mary sat by the hearth and listened. The house murmured. The hollow side, the lullaby came and went like a tide. Perhaps they had given the valley a new cadence. Perhaps they had simply borrowed time. The diary lay ruined, like a promise fallen to the floor. The painted horse nestled in Mary's apron like a living thing. The boys slept in a single bed, their arms wrapped around each other. Mary watched them and felt the shape of decision settle into her. She would not surrender her children to a memory, no matter the hunger that had made it. She would not trade living breath for the ghosts of another mother. She would resist with rope and chain, with witness and labor, and with the stubborn, terrible love that kept the living awake through every long and endless night. When the lullaby rose that night, it sounded thinner, wavered on a minor chord, and then softened. Whether the valley had accepted the ledger of rope or was merely biding time, she could not tell. She could only hold the boys and look at the mockery of a world outside and make herself ready for the days to come, ready for the ways in which loving something would demand that she heard it, that she burn it, that she'd choose to keep or to let go. The hollow watched, the house listened, the diary rotted into the dirt. The lullaby kept singing. The wind changed that night. It didn't howl, it whispered. Low, heavy, patient. Mary could feel it moving under the door, curling through the cracks in the floorboards like breath from something half asleep. The rope Jonah had tied to the stones creaked with each shift of air, as though something tugged from below. She sat by the hearth, her hands gripping the edge of her chair until her knuckles ached. The fire burned wrong too still, to blue end. Even its light seemed afraid to touch the walls. The boys were in bed, but she could hear them murmuring. Not the soft babble of dreams, but the kind of whisper that follows rhythm, a chant too old for children to know. She rose, step by step, and opened the door. Thomas sat cross-legged at the foot of the bed, tracing shapes in the blanket with one finger, circles, lines, the same pattern he had drawn in the dirt. Eli's eyes were open, wide and glassy, fixed on the ceiling. They both stopped when she entered, like actors caught forgetting their lines. "What are you saying?" she asked. Thomas blinked slowly. "She's teaching us to remember." "Remember what? The song?" Eli whispered. "The one from before we were born." Mary felt her stomach twist. She crossed the room, knelt beside them, and held their hands. Their skin was cold. "You would listen to me?" she said, her voice shaking. "You're not to talk to her again. Do you hear me?" Eli smiled faintly, but she said you already did. The lamp flickered, then went out. The dark came sudden and full, for a heartbeat. Mary thought she saw another figure kneeling where she was, a shadow overlaid on her own body, arms extended in the same motion, mirroring her. When the flame returned, she was alone. The boys slept again, their faces calm, as if nothing had happened. Outside, the fog had thickened until the house floated inside it like an island. Jonah's lantern glowed faintly through the mist. He was still awake, keeping watch by the stones. She stepped out into the cold and walked to him. Each step sank deeper into the mud than the one before. The air smelled of rain that hadn't yet fallen. Jonah didn't look up when she reached him. "It's moving again," he said. His voice was low, reverent. You hear that Mary leasoned. At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, from beneath the ground, came a sound like water flowing through pipe steady, deliberate, and too close. "She's under there," Jonah said. "Not gone. Just waiting." Mary shook her head. "We buried the book. We tied the rope. You said that would hold her." "I said it might," Jonah answered. "But the thing about grief is, it learns how to crawl." Lightning flashed behind the hills. No thunder following. The rope that bound the stone gave a small, sharp snap, just one strand, but it sounded like a bone breaking. Jonah turned pale. "Get inside," he said quickly. Now, she ran. The fog moved with her, curling around her legs, clutching at her dress. The door slammed shut behind her before she could touch it. The air inside was colder than outside now, thick with the smell of damp wood and lilac. The fire was gone. The walls pulsed faintly, breathing. She heard a sound from upstairs. The cradle, rocking. Mary climbed the steps. Each board complained under her feet, groaning as if alive. At the top, the air shimmered like heat over water. The cradle moved by itself, slow, methodical, gentle. Inside lay the wooden horse she'd found, the toy she thought she'd buried. Its head turned slightly toward her, the paint glinting gold in the dim light. "Eleanor," she whispered, "if you can hear me, you had your chance. Let them go." For a moment, the house listened. The wind paused. Even the rope outside seemed still. Then came the voice, soft as ever, all warmth and ruin. "They are already mine." The cradle stopped. The boards beneath her feet began to creak, one by one, in a circle around her. She stumbled back toward the stairs, clutching the railing. Below, the front door burst open, fog rushing in like water. She could see Jonah's light flickering through it, the silhouette of the man shouting her name, though no sound reached her. The mist swallowed him before she could move. Behind her, the lullaby started again, closer, clearer, sung in her own voice. Mary fell to her knees. "What do you want?" she cried. The answer came like breath against her ear to finish the song. Morning broke like a wound that refused to close. The sky was a single bruise of gray, and the air smelled of metal, of rain yet to fall. Mary rose before the boys, her eyes dry, her hands raw. The chain outside the house was still in place, but slack now as if whatever it held had learned to wait. She stood by the window, listening. For the first time in days, there was no humming, only the slow breath of wind sliding through the hollow. Jonah came just after dawn. His coat was soaked through, and his face looked years older than the night before. He stepped onto the porch without speaking and stared at the rope that circled the stone. "It's quieter," he said finally. "That should scare us more than noise." Mary nodded. "She's listening." They shared coffee that tasted of ash. The boys ate in silence, their eyes hollow and far away. Thomas still traced invisible lines on the table. Eli tapped the rhythm of the lullaby without sound. When the meal ended, Mary washed the cups, then turned to Jonah. "If she wants me, she can have me," she said. "Not them." Jonah looked at her for a long moment. "There's ways of giving and ways of ending," he said softly. "I know," she replied. That afternoon the valley darkened again. Clouds gathered, low and heavy, until the light turned the color of pewter. Mary told the boys to stay inside. She tied her hair back, took the lamp, and walked toward the hollow. Jonah followed at a distance, though he knew she meant to go alone. The ground sank with every step. The rope's end trailed behind her, dragging like a tale of memory. When she reached the stones, she knelt and placed her palms flat on the earth. The soil was cool, pulsing faintly as if it breathed. "Eleanor," she whispered, "you wanted them back. You wanted your sons, but these aren't yours." The wind stirred, carrying with it the smell of lavender, then the faint echo of children laughing. Mary closed her eyes. "Take me instead. Let them go." For a moment, nothing. Then the ground beneath her trembled, a low vibration that rose through her bones. The fog thickened, curling around her arms. A voice rose, not cruel, not kind, just vast. "They were never yours to keep." Mary opened her eyes. The figure of the woman stood before her, woven from mist and memory, hair flowing like smoke. The eyes that met hers were not human. They were reflections of water and sky and sorrow. "You buried me wrong," Eleanor said. "You prayed the wrong words." "I'm praying now," Mary answered. The ghost reached out, fingers brushing Mary's cheek. The touch was warm, almost laving. "You understand then?" she said. To love is to let the land remember you. Mary took her hand. Then remember this, she whispered, and pulled the lantern close. The flame caught the hem of her skirt first. It spread quick, hungry, climbing, fabric, hair, skin. Jonah shouted her name from the ridge, but she didn't hear. The fire took her like breath swift, bright, terrible. The ghost screamed with her, a sound that wasn't pain but release. The valley erupted in wind. The fog blew outward in a single rush, scattering ash across the fields. The stones cracked. The rope snapped clean. And then, all at once, silence. When Jonah reached the hollow, there was nothing left but smoke and a circle of scorched earth. The air was still, the sky clearing. He fell to his knees, head bowed. From the ridge, he could see the boys standing on the porch, their small figures haloed by light. The wind touched them gently, almost tenderly, and for the first time, they didn't flinch. That night, the rain came. It fell soft and steady, washing the valley clean. Jonah buried what he could find beneath the largest stone and marked it with 3 words carved by a shaking hand. She kept them safe. The seasons turned. The rope rusted, the house collapsed, and the land grew wild again. Travelers who passed through spoke of a strange calm in the hollow. No birds, no insects, only the sound of wind moving through long grass like the whisper of a lullaby. Years later, when Thomas was a grown man with gray in his hair, he came back once. He brought his own children, showed them the field, the stones. He told them nothing of ghosts. He only said, "My mother lived here once. She was brave." At dusk, when they left, his daughter lingered at the edge of the field. She swore she heard someone humming soft, steady, and full of peace. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the land, remembering her name. And when night finally fell, a single lamp flickered to life in the distance, its glow faint, golden, and endless. "Sleep now," a voice seemed to murmur. "The flood is over. The land keeps its quiet now. Grass covers what was once the path, and the stones rise only half from the soil like teeth dulled by time. People pass through and feel something they cannot. Name a pause in the air, a small weight in the chest. They call it superstition and walk faster. The valley lets them go. No one remembers the name Mary Whitfield, not in the way names are meant to be remembered. Her story lies folded inside the earth, pressed between layers of ash and root. But when rain falls just right, you can still see the faint circle where the fire burned. And sometimes, when the fog clings to the ground, there's a light there. Not bright, just steady. Jonah was the last to leave. Before he went, he built a small wooden cross and carved the words against she, kept them safe. The weather has since taken most of the letters, but the shape remains enough for the wind to read. He said, "Once that land and love are the same. Both keep what they're given. Both demand something back. The years passed. The rope rotted. The cabin vanished. And wildflowers took their place. But the song never really ended. It lives in the hum of the river, at dusk, in the echo of a door closing softly in an empty house. Children who grow up near here still dream of lullabies they've never been taught. And sometimes, when the moon hides and the world stands still, a faint voice rises from the hollow not to haunt, not to hurt, but to remind. Sleep now, it whispers through the grass. The flood is over."